Hey folks, welcome to the Dark Horse Podcast Inside Rail. I have the distinct honor of sitting this morning with Senator Ron Johnson here in studio. It is the 24th anniversary this year of the attacks that occurred on September 11th, 2001. You and I are both patriotic Americans, and it is significant to discover that Americans, who one would think were as free as anyone on earth to discuss whatever it is they should choose to discuss, feel that they do not have that freedom because of the consequences in their own lives when they do so.
As my role as former chairman of Homeland Security, now then ranking member of the Permanent Subcommittee Investigations, I had never heard of World Trade Center Building 7. Never heard of it. I'm reasonably well informed. Okay, I read a lot. I'd never heard of it. And then you feel like, why? And then you see that thing come down and nobody talked about it. I think a big part of the problem is any alternate scenario, any alternative explanation, you wouldn't want to even contemplate. If it weren't these crazy Islamic terrorists that had this plot that brought down, then what did happen? So then the next question is, well, who would have placed explosives in those buildings? And nobody, literally, virtually no one wants to go down that path.
We're damned if we do and damned if we don't. Any answer is unthinkable. But not discovering the answer to that question is equally unthinkable. Americans should go down this road and pursue every loose end that exists in this story.
I'm not sure we'll ever get the answers to it. And in particular with 9/11, I think it's a legitimate point to be made. We maybe don't want to know the answers.
Well,
I mean, you know what I'm saying? I mean, I don't. Can we really afford to know the truth?
I don't think we can handle the truth. So, I mean, that is.
I mean, it's a legitimate concern. So the question I always have is, who are they? who are they?
Well,
I have no idea.
I don't know either. I will say this. People like you and me are often challenged. Who are they? We can see the hand of they all over the place. Multiple different topics. We don't know who they are. But that's not, I'd love to know who they are. I think we can name a few names that are likely on the list. But as for who decided to do this and why, that is an open question. Yes, we would love to know who did what and why. That is an important question, even if we can't punish them. Knowing that at least allows us to recover our own history so that we can act rationally going forward.
Now, do we actually have the final answer? Do we know who really prompted, who's responsible for 9/11? Again, it's also a legitimate concern. Can we handle the truth? Do we really want to know that answer?
Well, again,
you and I do, but I mean,
I would say I don't know whether we can handle the truth, but I think it's a question of relative hazards. The truth, I think, is a hazard, and I'm not going to pretend it's a small one. Not having it is clearly, to me, a much worse hazard.
Listen, I'm for the truth. I'm for transparency.
The reason that World Trade Center 7 plays the role that it does is that it really is a smoking gun. There's no explaining World Trade Center 7 in a satisfactory way.
Which is why we never heard about it.
Why we didn't hear about it, right.
That's the first evidence right there. They were so effectively suppressed that story.
Which is
because there could be no explanation for it.
Which in fact brings me back to your point about murder and witnesses and fears you and I might, I think, legitimately have about having our lives ended.
Oh wait, I'm not suicidal. I love life.
Yes, me too.
I can't imagine ever contemplating suicide.
Even if elements of our government participated here somehow. Most of our government didn't know anything about it. Obviously, if you're going to create some sort of a phony event, you can't have entire agencies be aware of it. That wouldn't work. So what you have is agencies that don't understand that they're not supposed to be investigating something. And then I don't know how that plays out internal to these things. So you have to imagine that there's the earnest FBI and there's the corrupt FBI. And they live in the same building. And maybe if you're inside the thing, you don't even know who's who.
Anybody watching this, if you have information, I'm open for business. I'm collecting information. I told you about a gentleman I saw outside the Hart building. He'd claimed to have been to my office and left them information because I asked him if he had a business card, so I left it with your office. Nobody in my staff has that, but basically he told me the story. He is a government employee. He volunteered to help out in the aftermath of 9/11, so they assigned him to the debris pile. And they had debris going by a conveyor, and his job was to just pull out anything that looked like an electronic component.
Now,
again, that's just a little tidbit of information. I thought that was quite interesting when they just couldn't get rid of that crap soon enough. Put it on a barge to be recycled over in China within 2 weeks, but they're having volunteers, government employee volunteers, go through and extracting any electronic component. Why would they do that?
Well, so let's fill this in.
So if that guy's listening, I want to know your name. I want to ask you some more questions.
With respect to the pulling of electronic components from the WTC 7 site, I did look into it after you mentioned it. I'd never heard of it before. I can't remember where I found a description of it, but I did find a description that this, in fact, had happened. World Trade Center 7 contained really interesting stuff. The Enron files being part of it, or some of the Enron files. The Enron scandal was a major problem for the Bush administration because the Bush administration was closely tied with Enron. Ken Lay was a good friend of the president. And the Enron scandal, I did not remember this, it effectively spanned 9/11. And it wasn't the only, the CIA also had an office in World Trade Center 7. One could imagine an honorable search for hard drives to recover some of that information. And one could also imagine that the idea was they didn't want that information to survive. So looking for it made sense. So I don't know what of these things explains that, but it's certainly interesting that somebody came to you, suggested that this had happened, and then vanished.
Yeah.
And you can't find them.
People get destroyed.
Yeah, you get punished.
Yeah. Whether it's your career or your reputation, people lose their lives. I mean, I'm assuming that we don't know anywhere near enough to be in danger from that standpoint.
I hope not.
The alternate theories of what may be true, you just don't want to contemplate. You see the truth, your eyes are open, you can't close them. I've seen truth after truth after truth that's been covered up and hidden, and the lies. At some point, I'm going to pursue the truth. I will try and uncover it. I'll try and expose it. Try and publicize it. And that's what's getting very difficult. Is what is the truth? How do you discern it? It's a real challenge. But glad I met you on that trail.
Yeah, I'm really glad that we met on that trail, and I want to thank you for doing this.